Thanks very much. There are a few things one learns when you're driving in the desert running out of gas. Last year, as Jim and I drove back from NYUAD, unable to find a gas station, me very embarrassed, all of us quite nervous, he taught me a very, very important lesson. He said, when the heat is on, slow down, calm down and think. I think it's quite fitting. It's the kind of attitude that has allowed him to cross the cultural and political barriers that he has over all these decades, and just as important to be such a service to the Arab American community. It's a full house. We have a limited time to talk, but and of course the events of today make this topic especially interesting and especially topical for all of us. The events in Benghazi and in Cairo and the continued news coming out of there. It will be a part of the discussion, but obviously we will be focusing mostly on Jim's research. Of course, I'd love to think that you all came to see me, but I am indeed honored to be introducing Jim, whom I first met when I was 18 years old and in college. He seems to have forgotten me in the audience. But if you were an Arab American in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, you likely knew of Jim and Jim's tireless work to mobilize Arab Americans to vote and to engage in the political system. What an important role it was, and really to bring out Arab Americans from a disparate community and to try to find some common ground to push forward in the American political system. Jim is the founder and president of the Arab American Institute, a Washington-based organization that has served as the political and policy research arm of the Arab American community for almost 3 decades. Even more important for me, actually, is that Jim has been a regular columnist for The National for the past 4 years. He's been writing on U.S. and Middle East issues. And in addition to his weekly column, he recently led a daily blog, as you were noting, on the Republican and Democratic conventions. You can find his writings at www.thenational.com/Zogby. You'll find an entire storehouse of everything he's written. Without further ado, let me just hand the stage to Jim, and then we'll start the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming this evening. I have to begin by expressing my absolute horror at what happened in Benghazi overnight. Ambassador Chris Stevens was a decent and rather brilliant public servant. Folks in my office who worked with him when he was detailed to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee said that this is a guy who really got it and cared deeply about the Arab people. I can't say more than Secretary of State Hillary Clinton did. It was a wanton act of murder, bottom line. You can hate the film, but you don't do what these guys did. And I don't want to dwell on it other than to make myself clear as an American, as somebody who cares deeply about the Arab world. This was wrong and should not have happened. Let me turn now to the study we did, because it for me was a real, look, I love polling. Polling for me opens a window. It lets voices in. Voices that don't get heard when you poll. I call it the respectful science. You talk to people, you listen to what every one of them say, you record them, and then you organize the data and present it back to people. Like I said, it opens a window. When you ask 5,000 people, what do you think? And then you organize their voices, you can hear them talk to you, especially when we do the open-ended questions and we say, what's the first thing that comes to mind, or what's the best thing, or what do you feel about this or that? We have polled often on American attitudes towards the Arab world, and we've polled often on Arab attitudes towards America. But this was different. This was an effort to reach out into the broader non-Arab Muslim world and say, what do you think about Arabs? What do you know about Arabs? And what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Arabs? And so in June, we went to 5 countries, Senegal, Iran, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Turkey. We interviewed 5,000 Muslims in an effort to understand their attitudes towards Arab civilization, toward the culture, toward the people, and towards several Arab countries. I'm going to present the findings, and we'll take a look at them in some detail, although you have the complete reports with you, and then we'll go from there to your questions. And if I figure out how this works, we're set. First, we asked what their general attitude towards Arabs were, and here's what we found. We found that overall there were generally positive attitudes, with the most positive being in Malaysia and Pakistan, and 76% in Iran, not bad, but the lowest was there. When you go one step further and you ask for the first thought that comes to mind when you think of Arabs, then you get an interesting array of responses. And I want you to look at it for a minute. When you talk about Islam, what they're saying is the origins of Islam. They're talking about the prophet, where the Quran was first given to the prophet. You get the responses about the early history of Islam and Islamic civilization generally. When you talk about Arab history and culture, you're talking about everything from the pyramids in Egypt to the great mosques that were built in different Arab countries, and aspects of history, still the ancient history, but also some of the cultural attributes. Interestingly, the category in the light blue, revolts and politics, was, if anything, the impact of Arab Spring. Because the politics wasn't about the politics of Palestine or the issue of Arab concerns. It was about the recent revolts. It was about Egypt, gets mentioned repeatedly, and you'll see that crop up again in another place. Interestingly, the negative comments, which were about a quarter of the Pakistani, Malaysian, and Turkey responses, but over half of the Iranian responses, focused on issues like backwards or passive. Iranians in particular seeing the Arabs as subservient to the West, unjust, and very divided among themselves. Overall, you still get favorable responses in most of the countries, with about a quarter of the negatives in the 3, and as I said, over half in Iran. When you ask about attitudes towards Arab states, you get an interesting mix. And I only have 2 up here, just by way of example. In Pakistan, very favorable toward all the countries. And in fact, in all of the 5 countries, in 4 of the 5 countries, they were almost all positive, but none as positive as Pakistan. Iran was the one exception, with favorable attitudes only toward Egypt and Lebanon, and very negative attitudes towards Saudi Arabia, UAE, and one might think surprisingly, Morocco. When you then ask the question, which countries should you have, how do you evaluate the relationship between your country and the Arab countries? Very positive Malaysia, positive in Senegal and Pakistan, somewhat surprisingly, Turkey leaning negative, but somewhat not surprisingly, Iran very negative, 2-to-1 almost on the negative side. A follow-up question was, should your country improve relations with the Arab countries? And all of them said yes. All of them said yes. But what was interesting was where they wanted to improve relations. In Senegal, this is in the report you can see in front of you. In Senegal, it was mostly the African Arab countries, with Egypt scoring high, Algeria and Morocco scoring high, and also then Saudi Arabia. In Pakistan, it was Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, and again in particular because of the politics of Pakistan. Palestine was one of the top 4 countries, ranking almost as high as the other 3. Not something you'd probably get in many Arab countries, but given the peculiar politics of Pakistan and its Islamic identity, Palestine scores very high. In Malaysia, it was Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE. In Turkey, it was Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Algeria, the big countries. In Iran, it was the countries they already have close relations with. It was Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria, but also Egypt. And again, it's because of the revolution in Egypt that made a mark on the Iranian attitude. Going to the next slide, when we then sort of tried to delve deeply into some attitudes toward Arab culture, toward Arab traits of behaviors, etc. And here's what we found. Contribution made by Arab civilization, Arab culture to Islamic civilization, very high in Pakistan, Malaysia, Senegal, high in Turkey, not so high in Iran. In fact, only in Iran and Turkey did they view their contributions to Islamic civilization as greater than the Arab contribution. And then when we asked about how you rate your culture versus Arab culture, the Iranian one was maybe the most interesting one, I thought. Given all the negatives, it was the Iranians who said equal the most, that their culture was equal. And interestingly enough, that followed through in other areas too, in terms of generosity, in terms of hard working, and in terms of, is your culture more violent than Arab culture? Every one of the countries questioned saw Arab culture as more violent than their own culture, except for Iran, which said it was equal in violence. I don't know what to do with that, but that's the response. The Turkey numbers were interesting, and we'll see that coming up again and again with a very high sense of Turkish superiority. And that comes through in almost every question. In fact, the Turkish responses were so interesting and so out of whack with everyone else that we actually went and re-polled Turkey and came up with almost exactly the same results. So I had to stand by them. We then wanted to know how people learned. Where did they get their information from? How did they form their attitude toward Arab countries? And one of the things we asked was, have you ever traveled to an Arab country? In other words, how direct is your experience there? And that was maybe the most interesting. In Senegal, obviously, what you're going to get a lot of, mostly, other African countries, although Saudi Arabia factors high. Iran, UAE is highest, but then the countries that Iran has close relations with, Syria, and an affinity with Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. In Pakistan, UAE and Saudi. Malaysia, Saudi, UAE are the highest. In Turkey, 5% of Turks have traveled to the Arab world. That number was maybe for me the most surprising number of all. That was the one that provoked me to do it again, and it came up with exactly the same number. And so I concluded that Turks don't visit this region and have formed their attitudes largely through what they get in media or what they get in school or studying about Arab civilization, but they don't have a direct experience. And to me, that was very surprising given the proximity of Syria and its open border up until recently with Turkey, rather, its open border with Syria. When we ask then, let me see this next one. Just let me look at Iran for a minute, and I'll go back to the last slide in a second. Does it matter how you form your attitude? Remember, Iran's attitude, I'll go back again. Iran's attitude toward UAE is 2-to-1 unfavorable. But of those who've traveled to the UAE, it's about 9% of all Iranians in the survey had come to the UAE. It's 58% favorable. So this actually, we say it's a good thing. If they know you, they like you, which is a whole lot better than if they know you, they don't like you. And it's also true in Pakistan, and it was also true in Malaysia. Those were the three countries where enough people had come to the UAE in particular to come up with a measure. In fact, what happens is that the overall number for Pakistan doesn't change significantly, but what changes is the attitudes that were initially somewhat favorable become very favorable. And so for very different reasons, Pakistanis and Iranians end up with favorable attitudes if they travel here, but they still have favorable attitudes, and that's the important thing. And then going back to this one, if the overall was 33 favorable, 65 unfavorable, if your primary source of information about Arabs was religion, 16% favorable toward the UAE. Family and friends, cinema, the only one that actually changes the attitude in a favorable direction is having a personal experience with the region. And then there was a final set that I thought were interesting and are not in the PowerPoint. And that was some questions that we asked about what the role of, proper role of a Muslim country should be. We asked the question, is it important for Muslims to confront the West or to find a way to coexist with the West? In every country other than Iran, absolute majority said coexist, except for Iran, which was 2-to-1 confront. And on the question of should one country lead the Muslim world, only in Turkey did an overwhelming majority of Turks say Turkey should lead. Most of the countries, including Iran, Senegal, obviously Pakistan and Malaysia, thought no country should lead and that all Muslims should be equal. And I'll end it there and we can have the conversation.
So if you're a GCC policymaker today, what would you do to improve those numbers?
I would encourage travel and trade because if the numbers were different, if traveling here and trading with here brought numbers down, I'd say keep them away. But it doesn't work that way. It actually works very much in your direction. So not unlike the numbers we get in the United States, when we poll in the US and we find out that even in countries that have very high negative attitudes towards America, it's not toward the American people, it's not toward American culture, it's not toward American values, and that those who visit America have significantly higher and more favorable attitudes. It's the same here. And so the answer is trade and travel improves relations and understanding.
Let me ask you
breaks down stereotypes.
Does it matter, actually? I mean, if this is what we've lived with for some time, does it matter?
In an increasingly interdependent world, it obviously matters, especially in this region, which is an east-west hub. It certainly matters. Given the extent, I've been talking to the folks in Dubai who are putting in a bid for the World Expo, and I was talking with them about it, and the first question I said is, after they described the expo and what the expo was going to be like and what it was going to do, and I thought it was just great, the first question I said is, what's different about the expo than what you should do every day? Which is this place is an expo. There are people from all over the world here all the time, and they're trading and traveling, et cetera. So yeah, understanding matters because it's good for business, it's good for politics, it's good for simply the stability that you need to advance.
It's very interesting. And I think, and the other outlier really is Turkey. And as Turkey reaches out into the region actually, and begins to engage the region much more aggressively, I find it very interesting that they really don't quite know what to do with the region, it seems.
And I think that it ultimately could spell trouble for Turkey. If its leadership role is thin and not supported either by people understanding Turkey or Turkey understanding the people. It could be about as thin as America's role, which is always at risk because of the lack of understanding and the shared exchanges that have to exist for healthy relationships to develop. One question that we got in an earlier poll that I thought was interesting, it was in the Arab world, it was attitude toward several countries in the world. And what we found, we asked the question, what country is currently providing leadership? We got Turkey. But when we asked what country should provide leadership, we got Egypt. So that at the time I saw Turkey as a placeholder. It's there because it's doing it by default because Egypt is in a bit of upheaval. But actually people want Egypt to lead again, or they want an Arab country to lead. And the degree to which Turks don't understand the region or have this inflated sense of being a superior culture over the region, it will get them in trouble. And from the little things that may happen to the bigger things that happen, to the degree to which there isn't a shared understanding and sense of value of each other, it spells difficulties. So I would think that what the Turks ought to do, if they're serious about playing an integrated role and a leadership role, they have to get out here more, bring their people here more, stop going east and west or north and west, and begin taking the region seriously as a place for exchange and trade and understanding.
And then finally, the Palestine issue is equally intriguing on the basis that it is such a definitive issue throughout the Muslim world, or so we have thought. But your numbers suggest maybe not so different.
No, I think just in the one question of countries to have relations with, the Pakistanis are going to be unique. I mean, it's without any disrespect to anyone in the Muslim world, the one country that feels a sense in its very being of the Ummah is Pakistan, always has. It was the country founded as the Muslim country. And I know from just my experience in the States, I mean, if you go to an Arab-American meeting, people talk about Palestine. You go to somebody raises the issue of Kashmir, and people go, wave it off. Or Chechnya, they wave it off. If you're at a Pakistani meeting, and I go to a number of them doing outreach work that I do in politics, Pakistanis weep over Lebanon, they weep over Palestine, they weep over Kashmir, they weep over Chechnya, they feel them all deeply. And so it doesn't surprise me that the Pakistanis would have that more expansive view and put Palestine up there as a country they want to have relations with more highly than the others. But if we ask the question about the importance of Palestine, which we didn't ask, if we asked it straight out, you'd get positives everywhere. You'd get very strong feelings everywhere.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting topic. I would like to ask, I was kind of disappointed not to see Indonesia represented. It's the largest, most populous Muslim country. Can I ask what the reason was that it was left out of your study, your survey?
It's the largest Muslim country. No, it's an incredibly complex country. And frankly, it was a budgetary issue. It would be a poll all by itself to be able to cover the diversity of Indonesia. And so what we opted for were countries where we could actually get a handle on the populace. It's not exactly polling in China, but can you do 1,000 in China and get anything? Maybe in Beijing you could, but not in China. And Indonesia is the same. Getting east, west, north, south, all the parts of the country become very complicated. And so as a budgetary issue, we were looking for a Southeast Asian Muslim population, and Malaysia was the one that came up. I can't give you any reason other than just the budgetary factor.
I have two quick questions. On the question, what is the first thought that comes to mind when you think of Arabs? I presume that was an open-ended question.
Yes.
And you categorized it.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's kind of an interesting tension between the first two questions with respect to Iran, where the first question is, what are your attitudes towards Arabs? And 76% are favorable in Iran. But then what are your first thought that comes to mind when you think of Arabs? And in Iran, 54% of the responses were negative. Why do you think that was the case?
That's why I asked the open-ended. You get a more honest response. It's sort of like after 9/11, we were doing a lot of polling in the Arab world and in America. And one of the reasons we got into polling here was Gallup had done a poll in which they came up with very unfavorable attitudes towards the United States. And I was actually at Meet the Press trying to deal with that because it was a matter of great controversy that Kuwaitis in particular had negative attitudes towards America. When asked the question, what do you think of the United States of America? Negative. So we decided to go in the field and do one of our own across the region. And we asked the open-ended question. And then we asked a bunch of other questions. And the reason why we did it was because I said that in a period of tension, When you ask the straight out question, it's sort of like asking the woman whose husband's been cheating on her and she just threw him out of the house, what do you think of men? She's going to give you a negative answer. But if you say to her, what do you think of husbands? Or what do you think of that one answer? What do you think of uncles and fathers and sons and brothers? You get different answers. And so we felt the need to, after saying, what do you think of Arabs, to then say, what's the first thing that comes to mind? What's the best thing that comes to mind? What's the worst thing? So we got it 3 different ways. And I only reported on the slide the one. But it gave us an interesting array of responses, which meant that the initial favorable was actually pretty soft and was masking a whole lot of other negatives that were there. Then when you ask about Arab countries, you get, Lebanon positive because they have very close affinity there. We didn't ask Syria, but I'm sure you'd get the same. But then when we asked about Saudi Arabia and UAE and even Morocco, you get very negative. So it was important to sort of, in other words, parse it out and get behind the initial favorable response. And on the American case, the one that we did, the initial response was negative, but then when you get into the sort of the variations on it, it was very positive. Like American culture, American education, American science and technology, movies and television, people, etc. So it's important to kind of go to that next step and not just stop with the favorable.
But it does suggest, in fact, that propaganda sometimes works.
Oh, very much so, which is when you look at the numbers here, if all you're listening to is what you learn from religion in Iran, you have a very negative attitude. But if you have even if you're watching movies, they're better. If you're learning about it in school, it's better. But if you come here and visit, the attitudes are much more favorable. So yeah, it makes a huge difference.
Professor Zogby, wonderful listening to you.
Say that again. I like that. That's nice.
I've said that many times to my students. I'm a sociologist at Zayed University, so I have to ask this question. I was very pleased to see, as I was reading this, that you did a stratified sampling in all these countries, which was absolutely the right thing to do. But having done that, did you look at variation between classes, A? B, did you look at ethnic differences in Malaysia, Chinese, Malay? C, when you look at travel, an Indian billionaire can come to Dubai for shopping, that's travel. An Indian worker can come to Abu Dhabi and work and live in Musafa. So obviously they would have different experiences. Did you capture that in your
Yes,
study?
to some degree, yes. The ethnic ones, no, because we didn't actually, that was not one of the demographics, but income was. And the only country where we got enough of a sample to be able to use the income factor was Pakistan, and it was across the board, very favorable. So I understand completely where you're going with that. But look, when the numbers are in the 70+ range, as they were in response to many of these, rule of thumb in polling is when it's 70+, it's going to largely be across the board. Every one of the subcategories are going to be positive. But in the case of Malaysia, the one you ask, or Turkey, where the numbers are so low of the people who've actually traveled here, it's very difficult to come up with you end up with like 20-something people in that subgroup, whereas in the Iran one, you had a few hundred. In the Pakistan one, you had a few hundred, and so it was easier to be able to look at the stratification and see that it was a pretty consistent set of numbers across the board. Even with the Iranians, it wasn't just the wealthier Iranian business people, but it was also downstream, lower income Iranians who've come here with favorable attitudes. So I'm aware of that concern. I think we covered it in the 2 places we could, but again, where the sample's too small, you can't, where the subset rather is too small, it's too hard to be able to get anything out of it.
I had two questions. The first one was on causality, and you were talking a little bit about how travel might affect someone's attitude towards a particular place. But don't you also think that in the first place, that it might be a positive attitude that means that they traveled there, as opposed to the traveling changing their attitude towards the Arab world? And the second was, I noticed in the back of your report, you've got you quite comprehensively went through each country, and you've surveyed from many cities and many different regions. Did you differentiate the data at all, so that to look at maybe different results from, for instance, in Turkey and in Istanbul compared to other areas that might have had?
Again, the numbers, where the numbers are 70% plus, no difference at all. I didn't find much of a range in terms of the different demographics. The problem is that if the demographic subset is so small, you really can't make much out of it. So I think we did account for that. On the causality question, I can only report to you what I can report to you. Don't ask the causality question. That would be another open-ended question. We didn't, why did you travel? Don't know. What I can tell you is that when we're looking at Pakistan and we're seeing some high income, many low income, I don't think it's they traveled here because they were just itching to get over here. I think they were traveling here largely for work. And if they were coming here for work and they go back with favorable attitudes higher than they were before they came, I think that that's a good thing. Or not higher than before they came, higher than the average or the general public, the ones who didn't travel here. I think it's a good thing. That's about all I can say. I can only report what we got, and I can't really speculate beyond that.
Do you believe that from the data that you've shown that the real gelling factor between these different nations is Islam, is Islamic values, is Islamic beliefs there, and the real decisive factor between these countries is the idea of nationalism? And this is really illustrated within the Turkish data that you actually put forward, that with Kemal Atatürk really indoctrinating the people within Turkey and really trying to obliterate the totality of Islam from the region, that really the division is from nationalism, and that's where the real worry lies. Thank you very much.
I think ethnicity or nationalism is a factor everywhere. Look at Senegal. The numbers in Senegal, 60+% say their culture is superior. You get the same in almost everyone. The only country where you don't get that is Pakistan. And there you get an even split between almost a third between my culture is superior, our cultures are the same, their culture is superior. One could say it's humility. One could say it is true religion, or the absence of a superior national ethos. I don't know, but what I do know is that in all the other countries, you got Turkey was the most exaggerated, but the others all had that same sense of my culture is superior. When we poll in the United States and we poll in the Arab world on similar questions, which culture is more generous, which culture is more this, more violent, more family values, the only thing I think that Americans and Arabs agree on is that Arabs are more inclined toward family values, which is interesting. Americans have a sense that their families don't hold together. But Americans think that Arabs are more violent, Arabs think Americans are more violent, and it's the same here. The only, like I said, the only two countries where there was a sense that there was a sort of an equal share of an inclination toward violence was the Iranians, identical, and the Pakistanis gave the Arabs a nod there too. So I think that the ethnic and what you call nationalism, but the ethnic sense is a decisive factor in almost every country.
How would these numbers be different, say, with today's events and what happens, say, in Libya and Cairo? Would they be affected at all?
I'm not sure that they would. Those who think Arabs are more violent got reinforced. Those who see it as an exception aren't going to. I think the American numbers are probably at risk. I think Americans are going to do a whole lot of head scratching, soul searching. I'm not there now, but I can bet you that the notion we help liberate them, this is what we get. I mean, there's going to be a lot of very angry and crude responses, and therefore I think it's going to be incumbent on the Libyan government to act quickly, decisively, and deal with it. They issued a condemnation, but I think they have to deal with it rather quickly. I also think that it takes a, I was just thinking of the Republican convention and the John McCain speech. For Americans who think we did it in Libya, we can do it in Syria, it's going to cause some head scratching now too about, is this the way it works? Shades of Afghanistan, Mujahideen, you know, that kind of, it comes back and kicks you in the rear. So I think it'll change a lot of American attitudes, but I don't see it having an impact in Malaysia, for example, in any significant way.
Sure. As an Emirati, it kind of worries me that even after personal experience, the Iranians are only 45% favorable of UAE. My question is this a normal trend? I mean, across countries, or it could have been better? No.
Let me explain that graph just to be clear. This Iranians who come here have a 58% favorable attitude toward UAE. That's that's this slide. Okay? This slide is that if your principal source, it actually should have read, if your principal source of information toward Arabs is personal experience, then only 45% favorable toward UAE. Not toward Arabs in general, just towards UAE. But the one about traveling here, it's 58%. So you get the difference?
So the first one was hypothetically. If
it was we asked people, what is your principal source of information about Arabs? And that was the response we got. 16% said religion was their principal source, down to 45% said personal experience was. Of those who said that, 45% have a favorable attitude toward UAE.
What about other countries?
The survey will, the full report will have some of that in it. If it's not there, I should tell you, if you want more information on the survey, if you want the complete results of the survey, just write to me at jzogby@aaiusa.org. That's jzogby@aaiusa.org. And jzogby. If you used a pencil, it's no, I'm just kidding. jzogby@aaiusa.org. And I will send you the complete data.
There was a comment made about Egypt leading the Arab world, and as an Egyptian myself, I'm really interested. That's not to say that I participate in any violent patriotism or anything, but I am nevertheless very interested. So could you expand on that?
It was a different survey, and it wasn't this one. It was a survey we did among Arabs. And most Arabs still see Egypt as the country they want to lead. And logically so, going back, its size, its pivotal role in history, and its pivotal role in the region. I mean, I call it the hinge. It's the hinge that connects the continents. And so, I think it has that role, and people still see it having that role. And I was actually, interested in the follow-up question to the which country leads, which country should lead, getting the different response in both cases.
Jim, has the rise of the Islamists helped in that regard?
We haven't polled since then, so I don't know. I would think that the school is still out. We don't know. We don't know how it plays out. But I think Egypt's role as leader in waiting is there. It's a question of how. When the president goes to Iran and gives the kind of speech he gave about Syria, that has an impact. I think that's the kind of thing that people were looking for. So we'll see how it plays out in the long term. But I think that it is if one could use the empty chair, not the way Clint Eastwood used it, but the chair, the role is still there, waiting for Egypt to play that role. And I don't think, I have to believe also that Nasser plays a role in that. That there's still the person who spoke about nationalism, and whether Nasserism is dead or not, the notion of Egypt playing a leadership role is real.
I'd like to pick on that religion point briefly, if I may. How much information were you able to capture from respondents in terms of what type of Islam they follow? And how different would you expect Iranian attitudes to be towards Bahrain as opposed to the UAE, for example?
We did ask a Sunni Shia question, and most people will respond, and did. I am looking now to see, Bahrain did not factor in. The only time that Bahrain came into the discussion was in travel and in, do you know any Arabs? For the very small number of Turks who either knew Arabs or had traveled, they said they'd been to Bahrain. And I don't know how to account for that.
It's a hub?
But commercial hub, maybe banking. The other place it came in was Malaysia. In terms of countries that your country should have closer ties with, Bahrain came in third. And I thought that was interesting there as well. One issue to talk that was intriguing was we've done this before. It's a sort of a little side question, but it kind of opens up some stuff. 2 cities in the world you would most like to visit, and in every country, Mecca came in first or second, except in Iran, where it came in almost dead last.
Yes.
Which I thought was really interesting. New York and Paris. New York came in the top in everyone but Pakistan, and Paris. Paris was number 2 in Iran. Figure. Don't want to go to Mecca, but I'll go to Paris. So I thought that was interesting. Little tidbits you pick up along the way,
I was wondering if you thought that your survey indicated that it was probably not in the interests of GCC countries to follow the American embargo on Iran, and whether that would make relations worse, and they don't seem to be very good already.
They don't seem to be very good, and that obviously has lowered the Iranian attitude toward here. But there's a significant number of Iranians living here and traveling and visiting here, and the relationship doesn't seem to have stopped because of the trade embargo. People still keep coming back and forth, from what I understand. So I'm not going to speak to that issue, other than to say that I am a believer in personal ties make a difference in building relationships and ultimately changing behavior. So that's my sense.
Thank you very much. This is in relationship to Iran. Using the historian side in you, if this survey was done before the revolution, what would have been the response? And the reason for that question is, if you look at the press in the area, Some of them go and talk about the Shu'ubiyya. Some of them are bringing the Burmese out and the historical reasons for the demise of the Sassanids and the takeover of Islam and the Arabs and so on to be ingrained as the reason for that, for this mutual thing. Is that something recent, or in other words, if the survey was done 30 years ago?
I do not know. We did not do a survey back in the 70s, but my sense is that the Iranian mindset and the Arab mindset have deeper historical roots than current conflict. And the strategic positioning of both, it predates maybe exacerbated by the revolution, but I think it predates the revolution in Iran. That'd be my rough sense of it, but we weren't in the business back in the 70s.
First of all, I would just ask you a question. Do you think it's very necessary to have a country that leads the Arab? That's my question.
Do I think it's necessary?
Yeah, you think it's necessary? Like, for example, many Arab countries think Egypt because of the previous history of Nasser.
I really can't speak to that. I mean, I don't think it is necessary. I'm just telling you that's what people would respond about who plays a leading role or who should play a leading role. They certainly see Turkey now playing a leading role in the region, although that may also be somewhat diminished. I don't know. We haven't polled on it recently. One of the things about polling is that we say it's a snapshot in time. It's sort of like a family picture in your album. But when you look at the picture, you know, you can say, oh, there's Uncle such and such. He died 2 weeks after the picture, you know? So the smiles on everyone's faces are only real for the time when the picture was taken, because 2 weeks later, people weren't smiling that way. So it only means, what I say is that in June of this year, this is what people said. Now, the only way you get a bigger story is when you poll on similar questions with using the same methodology, not similar questions, identical questions, using an identical methodology over time. And you begin to develop a trajectory. And you can say, these attitudes held constant, these attitudes dropped, these attitudes, you know, went up, etc. And, but this is the first time we've done this. If we do it again next year, I can come back and tell you, this is where attitudes are now, and there was a decline, or there was an increase. But the shoulds, those are questions that you don't get in a poll as much as you get, this is what people say.
So why did you conduct this poll? Was there a specific inspiration or reason for doing it?
Yeah. The transformations that were taking place in the region, I wanted to see what people were thinking about Arabs at this point in time. And I come here a lot, and I travel in the region a lot. And like I said, we've polled Arab attitudes, but we never polled beyond the region to any great extent. And I wanted to get a sense of, you know, some selected Muslim countries' attitudes towards Arabs. You all being here makes me think that maybe we caught an interesting topic that hadn't been done before. So I think that, you know, just it's always good to know what people think. And when people are playing an exceptionally important role, as the Turks are, and also as the Iranians are, and are as important as Pakistan is in terms of its engagement in this region, and Africa and Southeast Asia, it's important to know where people's heads are at. And so, yeah, that's why we did it. The less surprises you get in life, the better. And so opening the window, letting voices in, hearing what people are saying, becomes a way of sort of better positioning yourself and better understanding where people are. Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much.